Good morning, councillors. Good morning, executive. Good morning to those joining us in the digital gallery this morning. It's my privilege to declare the ordinary meeting of the 5th of July 2022 open. And in doing so, I would again acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet and also that form the footprint of our great region, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and again congratulate them on their continued nurture of their culture. Councillors, I note we do have a full attendance this morning, albeit that Councillor McConnell is attending remotely due to some health concerns. And we also have apologies this morning that the GM Asset and Environmental Sustainability is on leave, and we do have the acting in his place, Mr. Kartik Venkatraman. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us. This may be your first occasion in that chair, and thank you for taking the time. And we note also that the GM Council Sustainability is also on leave, and unfortunately his delegated acting is unwell today, so we will have an apology from that chair. That being said, we now progress further with our meeting, and we're privileged this morning to be joined by Pastor Josh Cox from the Beaudesert Baptist Church to lead us in prayers. Good morning, Josh.
Yeah, good morning, Mayor Greg. How you going?
Very well, thank you, and delighted that you can share with us on a brisk morning.
Yes, indeed. It's rather brisk and dreary, but anyway, if that's okay. Let me just share a couple of thoughts and a little verse and a prayer. This past week has been one of a little bit of contrast. We've had our holiday kids club up at the church, which has went really well. I think we had 56 kids, and it's been great. But in amongst that, we've had I had a couple of really good tough questions from young of the children, and needed to put my thinking cap on answering some of the questions. And the contrast, I guess, was from that with them dealing on the same week with some really difficult situations. One was a elderly lady who is pretty desperate for accommodation, and not that we really found a solution to that, but trying to help her out in some way. And then the other one was actually sitting with a family who has gone through some really, a local family, some great tragedy, which unfolded last week, and I'm sure many are aware of, and they'll be taking that service on Friday. So I guess it was in those sort of that contrast of young and old, and grieving, and facing great difficulties of just knowing wisdom that's needed in these situations, and being reminded of the fact that it's wisdom that's sort of outside of my realm of expertise in many ways. And so the proverb I want to read is just one verse, and it's, "For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding." And I'll certainly pray for wisdom for the meeting today, as I pray for wisdom for you as councillors, and anybody involved in decision making in the council. So let me pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I ask for your gracious hand upon each of us. Lord, I pray for your wisdom. Lord, we each encounter situations, Lord, which we feel outside of our depth and our realm of ability, but Lord, where we are required to give words of comfort or direction, or to make decisions, or to provide some sort of assistance and help. And so we pray for those moments, Lord. We pray that we would know your wisdom, your knowledge, your understanding of situations, and we ask the Heavenly Father, especially bring that to bear, Lord, in the meeting today, and Lord, for even the coming week, for all of our councillors and all those involved with council, and the decisions they make moment by moment, day by day. And so we commit the meeting to you. We commit each one to you now, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Josh. As ever, it's a pleasure to share with you, and indeed that reminder of the diversity of challenges that our community continues to face and the extremities of wisdom beyond our understanding is a great reminder. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we understand you have a bit to continue with, and we'll understand if you don't continue to join us through the digital gallery. But thank you for taking the time with us this morning.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Bye. Councillors, we now turn to item 5 on our agenda, which is declarations of prescribed or declarable conflicts of interest. I've not been advised of any concerning the business before Council today by the CEO, but I'll check again at the table if there are any to declare. Okay. Silence as indicating no. So we move to item 6 on the agenda, councillors, and I've only been advised of one announcement which I would share with you this morning, and that is concerning NAIDOC Week. On behalf of our community and council, I'd like to acknowledge NAIDOC Week, which this year runs from the 3rd to the 10th of July. NAIDOC Week is a time to celebrate the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. NAIDOC Week is celebrated by all Australians and is a great opportunity to learn about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. This week is an opportunity for the region to recognise the contributions that First Nations Australians make to our country, region and to our society. This year's theme for NAIDOC Week is Get Up, Show Up. We must all continue to get up, stand up, show up for systemic change and keep rallying around our elders and our communities. The relationship between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous Australians needs to be based on justice, equity and the proper recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's rights. Council will also be flying both Australian Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag, which confirms our respect for First Nations Australians. Thank you, councillors. I have moved to item 7. I have no notifications of deputations or petitions for today. So we come to item 8, which is the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting, and there is a recommendation before us, councillors, that minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 21st of June 2022 be adopted. I firstly seek a mover. Councillor Enright. Are there any questions to the minutes? If not, I'll seek a seconder. Councillor McInnes. Any wish to speak, councillor? Anyone else seeking leave to speak? Keep trying to keep watch for Councillor McConnell, who appears occasionally on the screen. If not, we'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's I can't quite see Councillor McConnell. That's in favour. Thank you. That's unanimous. We move to item 9. I have no notified business arising before the meeting today. We therefore move forward to item 10 on our agenda, which is the business of meeting today. We move to item 10.1. And I'll ask the GM Customer and Regional Prosperity to introduce this item, noting that we do have officers who have joined us to present this matter.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors and those listening in the digital gallery. Today 10.1 is regarding RAL 21/058. It's the development permit for reconfiguring a lot, subdivision 1 into 29 low density residential lots, 3 balance lots and one infrastructure on lot 1 Pocock Road, Hoya, lot 3 RP 880276. With me today to present this, I have the Acting Principal Specialist of Development Assessment and Engineering, Joseph, and the Principal Specialist of Strategic Planning, Heather, and I'm going to hand over to Joseph to kick us off on this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah, and good morning, Council. The development application seeks a reconfiguration of a lot by way of subdivision. This involves subdivision of the subject lot into 29 lots intended for low-density residential purposes, 2 balanced lots, and 1 lot to contain an existing residence, a drainage lot, and dedication of new roads. The site is situated in the locality of Hoya, approximately 1.5 kilometres north of the township of Boonah, and is both located within the urban footprint under the SEQ regional plan and zoned low-density residential under Council's planning scheme. The existing site is a single allotment, irregular in shape, and is approximately 5.3 hectares in size, improved with a house but is otherwise vacant and generally cleared of vegetation. The fall of the land is generally towards a dam in the southwest corner. Elevations range from approximately 154 metre AHD at the high point along Pocock Road frontage to approximately 129 metres AHD in the southern corner. The locality itself is dominated by detached dwellings on rural residential properties. Whilst low-density residential zone land is prevalent in this location, much of it remains undeveloped. Land adjoining the site is undeveloped low-density residential land, with rural residential zone land situated on the opposite side of Hoya Road, and rural land zoned is situated further south, further west and northwest. As stated, the subdivision seeks to create 29 low-density residential lots over a single stage. Resulting lots will vary in size, with a minimum size of 600 metres squared and a maximum size of 856 metres squared, achieving the average lot size of 700 square metres as in accordance with Council's planning scheme. All allotments will be connected to all urban reticulated services and in accordance with the relevant standards. The proposed infrastructure lot will support stormwater and a pump station in the southern corner of the development. The applicant, as part of the application material, has also included a master plan concept for a further 2 stages over the adjoining lots, which would be the subject of a future development application. Stage 3, as shown in the master plan of the report, will provide the infrastructure allotment for the total development, at which time the infrastructure allot proposed as part of Stage 1 will become parkland. Conditions have been included to manage the transition from a temporary stormwater basin to parkland as part of the recommendation. A total of 596 metres of new road will be constructed as part of the development, as well as Hoya Road will be extended from the south from Pocock Road to service the new development. It will be designed and constructed as a trunk collector. The road section includes footpath on one side of the street, which aligns with the intent of the Council's local government infrastructure plan. Full construction of this section of Hoya Road is conditioned as part of the recommendation. It is noted that the applicant would be entitled to seek trunk conversion under the adopted infrastructure charges resolution in relation to these additional works. The main road through the subdivision will be designed and constructed as a collector street, whilst the cul-de-sacs will be access streets and will have a reduced road reserve and carriage width in accordance with an access street. The majority of overland flows run towards an existing dam located in the southwestern portion of the site. The dam overflows towards a second dam on the adjoining property. This discharge point will form the lawful point of discharge for the site runoff. An easement will be attained by agreement with the adjoining parties to convey stormwater flows throughout the downstream properties. As part of the application material, the applicant has submitted signed authority from the adjoining landowner in relation to this legal point of discharge. In relation to the infrastructure works, a subsequent operational works permit will be required to service and support the development, which doesn't form part of this current application. The reconfiguration application has been considered against the planning scheme, where it triggers code assessment against the relevant assessment benchmarks. The relevant assessment benchmarks of the planning scheme include the low density residential zone code, reconfiguring a lot code, earthworks construction and water quality code, infrastructure design code, landslide hazard and steep slopes overlay code, and the regional infrastructure overlay code. In addition to the planning scheme requirements, Schedule 12A of the planning regulation for walkable neighbourhoods also forms a relevant assessment benchmark on all residential subdivisions. In relation to the planning scheme assessment, officers have concluded that the proposal generally complies with the requirements of the scheme, including the requirement for a minimum average lot size of 700 metres squared and not less than 600 metres squared. The majority of the development has also achieved the minimum 18-metre frontage requirement for all lots. However, proposed lots 10 and 16 have required a performance-based assessment due to a reduced frontage. These lots are the result of a bend in the road causing the reduced frontages. However, both have a functional size to support a residential use of over 720 metres squared. The development and resulting lot sizes are commensurate with the intended character of the zoning under the planning scheme envisioned for low-density residential. The development has demonstrated compliance or has otherwise been conditioned to comply with all the relevant matters under the planning scheme. In relation to the walkable neighbourhoods requirement under the planning regulation, there is a requirement for the provision of park where there is no existing parkland provided in proximity to the subdivision. The initial stage of this development does not provide for any park provision, and offers are accepting of this non-compliance due to the limited scale of the development and the intention for parkland to be provided at a later stage. As previously highlighted, the intention is to convert the infrastructure allotment as part of a future stage, which would provide parkland central to the overall master plan concept and achieve compliance with the walkable neighbourhood requirements. The application is being recommended by officers for approval in full, subject to conditions outlined in the recommendation of this report. If approved, infrastructure charges will also be levied in accordance with Council's charges policy. These calculations are also contained within the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. Councillors, questions firstly for clarification to the report? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. Perhaps mostly for the benefit of the people who may be listening with this application, I wonder if it would be possible to outline the requirements under the Scenic Rim Planning Scheme for this code accessible application for this residential zone.
So the primary requirement is to be commensurate with the low density residential zoning of which the subject property is zoned. And in that requirement to meet the code accessible application is that no lots are proposed under 600 metres squared with an average lot size for the overall development of 700 metres squared. And in that kind of calculation, any lots which are over 1,200 metres squared are just considered 1,200 metres squared to achieve that average consideration. In addition to consideration of the application, there's the relevant other development codes which inform the infrastructure provision for the site as well. And through the officer's assessment, it's been concluded that where an acceptable outcome hasn't been achieved, there's still been an alternative solution provided which has been assessed on its merits against the performance outcome and has been deemed to generally comply with the requirements of the codes.
Thank you for those answers. Councillors, any further clarifications? Councillor Swanborough.
Yes, my question is, prior to this being presented on the agenda for this meeting, were draft conditions of approval provided to the applicant?
Not that I'm aware of. I believe there would be some discussion around the trunk or trunk, non-trunk upgrade of Hoya Road, but I'm not aware of any provision of draft conditions, no.
You have a further question, Councillor Swanborough?
Yes. Yeah, a further question is in relation to the question of the trunk infrastructure. Is it likely that they will come back after this approval and negotiate with officers on this particular issue?
In relation to the provision of the Hoya Road upgrade, is that correct? So the Hoya Road upgrade would still require a subsequent development application for operational works permit, and that would have to comply with Council's standard policies. So it would only be in the instance where they're proposing something which isn't in accordance with that, there would be further discussion. But as it stands, the intention is that it would be a trunk collector road, and that's been mapped on the or indicated on the plan submitted by the applicant as well.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Enright?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just perhaps a further question regarding the upgrade of the unformed Hoya Road. Could you please explain the intention and the timing of condition 12, which is on page 21?
So the intention of that condition is around initially the applicant proposed a two-third construction. However, officers seen it pertinent to actually require the full construction of the road, and in that there would be opportunity for the applicant to seek conversion to trunk to offset the infrastructure charges. However, that would be further consideration and doesn't form part of this current application. In terms of the actual construction requirement, that would be prior to plan sealing, and the development is intended to occur as a single stage. So council wouldn't release or endorse the survey plan until that becomes off maintenance, that road.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor McInnes?
Yes, could I just ask if on the new section of road that is to be built where the development joins at, was consideration given to having a roundabout there, given what might happen down the track with further development in that pocket? Did council consider in the recommendation at all that putting a roundabout there?
Thanks, councillor. Not that I'm aware of, but any type of those considerations would form part of the subsequent operational works permit as well.
Thank you. Councillor McConnell, I believe you have a question.
Yes, if I could, just in relation to page 11, multiple neighbourhoods. It talks about provide for pedestrian connectivity to the surrounding street network when established. Could you give us some more details on what sort of walkways, bikeways will be used to connect the development down Hoyer Road to Booner itself?
So in terms of full connection of the development back towards Boonah, that would be considered, unreasonable to impose such a requirement on the developer itself. So the provision of footpath linkages would be ideally, or would be a requirement of to service the development. It's the development site itself. So there is a requirement for footpath provision for the construction of Hoyer Road, and this is indicated as part of council's LGIP. So, and then in addition to that, there would be the requirement for the collector streets, which form part of the development itself, to also include footpath provision in accordance with council standards. Those detailed designs would form part of a subsequent operational works permit.
Okay, so it'd be a walkway, bikeway down Hoyer Road for the development up there to link down to Booner.
Yeah, so it would only be to the extent of that frontage which forms part of the subject property. It wouldn't be the full extent back towards Boonah.
So how do they get back to Booner in the interim?
So the intention is that as further development occurs in the low density residential zone towards, it would be developer contributed as development continues in that pattern.
Okay, so the council don't have any control on where and when development of the area is taken, do they?
Correct. So whilst we can provide a zoning for an intended type of development to occur, whether it's subdivision and the like, we can't actually, direct them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Further questions? Councillors? Councillor Enright?
Thank you, Mayor. My question refers to page 23. Could you please explain the sequencing of the stormwater detention basin into parkland, noting that this application only refers to the infrastructure lot, but with the understanding of the master planning being a separate approval, just wanted to understand how that would progress in a future stage.
Thanks, councillor. The condition itself is reliant on future development of the adjoining sites for that to be transitioned to parkland. So as it's outlined in the applicant's material, there's a further 2 stages which would occur as part of the overall master plan concept. There's a proposed infrastructure lot which forms part of stage 3 of that development. In that instance, when that's created and is able to actually service the stormwater requirements of the overall development, would we be in a position to transfer and accept the parkland, so it wouldn't be until stage 3. There is also park provision proposed as part of that stage, which would connect onto this intended parkland, which would form a bit of a central park to the total development as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Chalk?
Yes, thank you. On that same topic of parklands, considering that the box size is at the very bare minimum and the requirement is there for parkland and it is proposed in future stages, how much consideration can we give to these future stages when we're uncertain of when and if they'll ever be progressed?
Thanks, Councillor. There's no guarantee that the future stages would be progressed, so I guess it's for Council's decision whether they're accepting of the non-compliance with the requirements of the state around park provision. We can't compel an applicant to continue on with the development pattern of the master plan.
Thank you. Councillors, further questions? Any additional comment, not debate at the moment, but any additional comment to add clarity to the matter at hand? If not, we move forward to introduce resolutions so that we can progress discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. The recommendation before you today is that 1, Council receive and note the report titled RAL 21/058, Development Permit for Reconfiguring a Lot, Subdivision 1 into 29 low-density residential lots, 3 balance lots and 1 infrastructure, at Lot 1, Pocock Road, Hoya, Lot 3, RP 880276. And 2, that Council approve development application RAL 21/058 and grant a development permit for reconfiguring a lot subject to imposition of reasonable and relevant conditions in Appendix A. And 3, that Council note that any subsequent requests for negotiated decision-making and or change applications to the approval RAL 21/058 will be processed by a delegated authority where the changes would not significantly alter the original decision.
Thank you. Councillors, I firstly seek a mover. Councillor McInnes. Further questions? Councillors? If not, open for a discussion before we any relevant discussion to this item. I would maybe open the discussion. This is obviously a thought-provoking proposal, which was hinted at in, I think, in the question from Councillor McConnell, that it seems out of sequence from what a simple logic would apply, that people like to see the flow of development gradually extending, and there's an intervening gap at this time which has created a perception of this being out of sequence. In reality, we can't enforce the sequencing of development of other people's properties in between. We have an accountability around managing what the zoning is across these places and suitability to that setting. It's, for me, given some of the other developments we've seen in recent time, a little to the west from here around Kelbar, where there's been perhaps a different thought about what is appropriate lot size, it whilst this is a compliant development in terms of lot size, it certainly creates a comparative question mark for consideration and certainly for appetite. However, it is a product of the times we're in, where there's a lot of interest in being part of the regional community, and particularly there's a lot of interest in being part of the Boona community. That has prompted this proposal coming forward, I would suspect. So I guess just offer that to open discussion, see if there's further discussion that councillors wish to engage. Councillor McConnell was...
Yeah, it's just going back to the connectivity to the town centre. As I said, we can't control where the developer starts, and in this one they've started on the extreme end of the zone. And my concern is even stage 1, but then stage 2 and 3 up to 190 lots, with no connectivity down to the town, and how we try and put that into the planning so that the residents that turn up in stage 1, the children in there do have the ability to ride down Boyer Road to school without having to ride on the road. So, it's a concern.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a concern everyone notes, but if I were just to clarify from what I understood from the officer's comment, in terms of a developer asking them to develop such connectivity beyond the extent of their estate is not a consideration we can apply within the planning scheme.
Yeah,
And that's right, and our eldritch says that there's going to be a footpath down Boyer Road, as said by the officer, but when is that going to go in, and does that help the residents in Stoke White be able to get children down to school without having to ride on the road?
So I'll just ask the officer to clarify.
Yeah.
Firstly.
Thanks, councillors. So we've got what's under the Planning Act is considered reasonable and relevant in terms of the imposition of conditions. For a single developer to construct the full length of footpath upgrade to provide that connectivity to Boona may be seen as unreasonable. Whilst it is relevant, it may be seen an above and beyond imposition on that developer.
Yeah, that's right, but it doesn't help people and stuff.
So, Councillor, we just might ask you to mute for a moment. Just while Councillor McConnell clears his throat and just retains his composure, Councillor Swamborough, thankful for
while he's clearing his throat, I'll provide a diversion. Just a question in relation to sequencing. So, if something has been zoned, low density residential, are you saying that there's no such thing as sequencing, that anybody can just build anywhere in that particular zone, and there's no consideration to the correct sequencing? I understood that there was a sequencing issues came about in relation to infrastructure, and whether the infrastructure, would be provided out of sequence or in sequence. And it seems to me that when I relate what Councillor McConnell has been saying here, that there is a need in this area for this type of infrastructure, and it is out of sequence. Why would it be unreasonable to ask the developer to therefore provide contribution towards that particular infrastructure if it's relevant? And you've said it's relevant, so we know that's the case. But who's going to decide whether it's reasonable or not? I think it probably is reasonable that he makes a contribution. Others might think the same thing, but do we have to go to court to determine that? Is that what you're saying?
So,
guess
sorry, I just want to
there's
take
three
away the
questions.
question there.
There's
Yeah.
three questions in there. So I think the first question was about what's reasonable. Then the next question about who makes the decision of what's
So in-
reasonable was probably the next.
I guess in terms of reasonableness, as it would service further allotments to the south, which would obviously, and them being the sole developer who would be footing the bill for that development of that, which is effectively providing a trunk function where other developers would benefit from. I don't think it's, that's where the unreasonableness is, given the length of construction which would be required to provide that connectivity. In terms of around outer sequence development, the development itself is able to be serviced in terms of your water and sewage provision. So that's not considered out of sequence, and the zoning does, under the current planning scheme, provides for the intention of that to be subdivided. So it's not, whilst it may appear to be out of sequence, it's not considered out of sequence. Yeah.
So just a further, not so much, it's my understanding, Councillor, in the context, and that should the intervening developments not progress in a whatever time frame, there'd be a consideration for council about the timing of activating parts of its LGIP, and taking accountability for that, noting that infrastructure charges that are allocated for such a development and for other developments feed into the timing and sequencing and the delivery of various parts of our LGIP.
The other consideration, Mayor, is the consideration of unreasonable costs.
I understand that for the individual, for the
that's
developer. I just was making that clarification about where the responsibility overlap is from the developer and the LGIP. That's my understanding. Is that?
I can't, thanks, Mayor. I can't speak to council's policy position on how they would undertake this in future, as we're only considering this current application, but it may be that council would have to bring forward certain works to provide that connectivity in the LGIP function of a footpath.
Or may choose to bring.
Yeah.
Further discussion, councillors. Councillor McConnell, are you back with us for a moment? Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, in relation to the footpath, because it's out of sequence and we can't put the onus on that just stage one to be able to build that, if council were to bring that forward, would they be able to then levy against the future stages to assist in the payment/reimbursement of that footpath?
So, councillor, I just need to correct a piece of language here. Whilst we're talking about it as appearing out of sequence, it is totally legally in sequence for this development. So we shouldn't confuse the debate. Whilst there is a perception, it is within the right zoning. It has access to the relevant water and sewer connectivity. It's in the classification for that. So it isn't out of sequence in the context of the scheme. It has an appearance of that because there is not intervening development. But I think your question is about if council were to proceed with the implementation of some form of infrastructure that made connectivity possible for pedestrian, let's say, that how could that be recouped with subsequent developments in between the current town infrastructure and this location?
Correct.
Thank you. So in terms of any infrastructure contributions, they're made towards the provision of council trunk infrastructure, so development in that general vicinity, any contributions levied would be towards those type of infrastructure provisions.
So if you, Councillor McConnell, basically I think that's through, the message there is that that's through the infrastructure charges for any future development.
Correct, and in accordance with council's adopted infrastructure charges resolution.
And we won't open the debate today about the adequacy of infrastructure charges. That's a conversation that's ongoing with the state about the limits they place on those. So, Councillor Enright, I think then.
Thank you, Mayor, and perhaps along similar lines, I think it's probably been recognised that there will at some stage be a need for a linkage for the footpath. Although we're assessing stage 1 with no guarantee of any other stages, but acknowledging that there will be 29 lots developed as a part of this first stage, are there a contribution toward the footpaths? Is that adequately addressed at this stage with what is proposed in the recommendation through infrastructure charges, or is that something that needs to be outlined at some future stage? There will be a contribution from the stage 1 as other developments along in the area may be progressed, so that triggers the...
Sorry, Councillor, I think we've gone back into questioning rather than discussion, which is a bit unfortunate for the officers to understand where we're at. So I'm happy to go back into some questions, but I think it's important to understand your question. I think it's probably worth, as a discussion point, without getting into what the quantum is, understand there's a limit on what can be allocated as infrastructure charges for this type of development. That limit is not within our scope to change. That maximum is set as a policy direction from the state. And so everything you were just trying to articulate about what might happen from other stages, that's the limit. That's the amount that we can collect. Now, it's a strong, particularly given the costs to deliver a whole range of things, those discussions are ongoing at present, but that's not appropriate for us to try to solve today. That's a conversation that's happening with multiple councils and the state about where that threshold is. So to your comment, whatever is collected by our infrastructure charges goes to support infrastructure. The determination of what's the sequence of that, because there's a lot of infrastructure that we have in pipeline, that's a future decision of council. It's not one that can be linked to an individual development.
Thank you. That's sort of answered the query.
So, but obviously it goes to an issue about the adequacy of those charges, which is far too big a can of worms to us to solve today. Any further questions, councillors, or can we continue on with discussion? Councillor McInnes, you've been waiting there for a bit.
Yep. Yeah. Discussion, I suppose, Mayor, rather than question. I look at this and it's, and maybe this is for debate more than anything, but there's been a number of comments made about the footpath, and I hear that, but there is only 29 blocks here, and I think, is it fair and reasonable to provide for the developer to provide what we've asked to? I think it is. There is only one other landowner between there and what is developed now, and that's up to them, as was stated earlier, whether they develop that land or not. It's been in the same family for a number of years, and then I look at the eastern side of Toya Road, and I think there'll be other development there in time too. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't down the track. There's some already, and I think it's up to those, when those developments come forward, that they contribute towards a footpath further down. I know it excuse me, doing a Councillor McConnell here.
But we can't mute you.
Yeah. There's a comment there, but I won't use it. It's, and Yeah, anything more than this is, I don't believe, fair and reasonable. It seems as though it goes to nowhere. That's right, it does to a certain extent now, but why should this developer be asked to contribute all the way down? And let's hope the fill-in, to coin a phrase, is done fairly soon, and that footpath does go all the way down to Springleigh Park.
Thank you, councillor. Any other discussion, councillors? Trying to see if Councillor McConnell's not waving to the screen. I guess in the context of discussion, one of the matters that was flagged in the officer's introduction was around playground space, whether short-term or otherwise, particularly given the uncertainty about the timing of further stages, which is totally within the commercial decision-making of an applicant of when they would proceed to other stages. But in the context of the determination about the suitability and the conditioning or non-observance around playgrounds, that's probably a matter I think it's worth just opening to discussion to hear thoughts around the table. Can hold the floor open for a few more moments. I just thought that might have been an avenue of discussion that there was some appetite around. Councillor Enright, were you?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And the benefit of a crystal ball would be greatly appreciated, but under the circumstances, we are restricted in assessing this application on stage 1 only. And while there may be considerations into a future stage, I'm wondering if there may be opportunities for the detention lot to be integrated more suitably with an open area that would be suitable for open space, with the understanding that this would eventually be the ultimate intention, I guess, and what that would be doing would be pushing out the detention area into a neighbouring property, and I can understand that that's difficult when we're assessing just within the boundaries of the stage 1. So happy for any advice on where we're limited to in that regard.
So I'll certainly, I don't know whether officers can add any clarity around that point about variations. I think the councillor's point was in reference to that southwestern corner where the detention basins indicated. Is there any capacity to vary that piece to include provision of some form of play equipment, given the prospect that this might actually be a place where there are young families and there's limited, that whilst they're compliant block sizes, they're limited block sizes, so therefore that creates a pressure for that space.
So just to confirm, is the question in relation to the provision of park as part of stage currently?
Yep.
So it would be a dual function where it's a stormwater function as well as some kind of park embellishments. That hasn't been included as part of the recommendation by the officers, so that would require further consideration if the intent is for council to go down that route.
Thank you. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Swanborough?
Yes, Mr Mayor. There was considerable public interest in this when it came to light, even though it's a code-accessible application when it was published. That this was occurring, there was a public meeting. I understand I wasn't able to come to that, but I was just wondering if since that public meeting, the officers have been able to understand the concerns of the residents and what additional steps have been taken to alleviate those concerns, or are we back at where we started from with this application?
The important thing to note is that the application being a code assessment is a bounded assessment. So in terms of relevant matters for consideration of the officers is solely the application material which has been submitted and the assessment benchmarks we assess against. So whilst there may be certain community sentiments around the whether this type of form of development is acceptable for its location in the context of the site is unfortunately not a relevant matter. The site has been zoned low density residential zone. The resulting lot sizes are commensurate with that intention of the zoning. So whilst we do understand the concerns of some of the residents who are in proximity to this development, it is considered in accordance with the planning scheme. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that from the strategic planning side. We've been noting these comments from the Boonah community as we've been finalising the draft growth management strategy. So we've been looking at how perhaps master planning provisions in the planning scheme amendment, through a planning scheme amendment, could improve outcomes for connectivity. We can better integrate outcomes for walkability and local parks and footpaths inside the planning scheme. So whilst this hasn't been able to be formally addressed through this development application process, we're definitely aware of these concerns, and we're going to try and make some improvements to the draft GMS to make sure that our future planning scheme can maybe better sort of get these quality outcomes that the community's after in Boonah and other places as well.
Yeah, we've sort of opened up a different avenue here, and I'll keep it going a little bit further. Can we get an explanation around the average 700 metre lots and minimum 600 metre lots? Because this is an area which is not desirable for the township of Boonah, and it's something that I understand council has pushed back in the past on. Can I get a little explanation from the staff about what the state plays, the part the state plays in setting these limits, please?
Yep, thanks for the question. So council is required to plan for the growth that's projected for the region and also to provide for a compact urban form in its urban footprint areas. Historically, this land's been in the urban footprint in Boonah since 2005, and it is flagged for growth. In the previous Boonah scheme, it was in the rural buffer zone, and since 2020, it's been in this low-density residential zone. In terms of the minimum lot size of 700 square metres on average, as a minimum average, the minimum lot size in that zone is 600 square metres, and you're required to, through a range of lot size, achieve that average outcome. This is still relatively larger than lot sizes that are expected and planned for in southeast Queensland, and we need to make sure that our planning scheme addresses those outcomes of the state planning policy for compact urban form and livability. We address the housing needs of our community, and these outcomes are also expressed in the regional plan. Through state interest review processes for the draft planning scheme, council is very keen to provide a point of difference in terms of its lot size so that we have opportunity for better lifestyle than you might expect in more inner urban areas of SEQ. However, on the balance, we need to provide for an urban form that's compact, easy to service, doesn't result in urban sprawl basically. So that 700 is still larger and provides for that sort of in-between outcome and a rural residential lifestyle for Boonah, while still meeting those targets of the shaping SEQ and the state planning policy. So just in context, other minimum lot sizes are around 500 square metres in SEQ.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor McInnes, you were...
Yes, Mayor, in relation to Councillor Swanborough's question there, I understand a group of residents had met with the developers and they did take into account their concerns, and I don't believe though any of those were submitters, but I'm not totally certainly the leads weren't submitters, so but they were quite pleased with at least one meeting, if not two, that they had with the developer, and I think he they'd changed their mind from what was originally proposed. So it was. I haven't been involved in those meetings, and I don't think Councillor Chalk has been either. But they certainly were a lot more pleased than what they were early on.
Thank you for that information, Councillor. Sometimes better understanding helps address those matters. Councillor West.
Sorry, mine's a question as well, actually, to the planners. Just looking at the parkland and the retention basin, are we within the timelines that there could be a little bit more thought put into that with the developer, if we were, or are we out of time? Is probably what I'm wondering.
Oh, thank you, Councillor. So in terms of, I guess, further consideration of the indication from Council I'm gathering is that they're seeking some form of park provision as part of this stage. Being a code assessment, we do run the risk of a deemed approval if we don't meet the timeframe. So the applicant themselves would have to be willing to work with council and extend the decision-making period to facilitate those conversations.
Thank you.
And if I could just add to that, Councillor, to the question that I think you're alluding to, the question from Councillor Enright earlier about that. I believe that were previously been indicated in other discussions that if that was to be considered, it would need to utilise adjoining house blocks to achieve what's being discussed. So that's probably also not palatable to the developer.
Councillor Swanborough.
Yeah, just in relation to Councillor West's inquiry, part 3 of this recommendation is that subsequent requests for a negotiated decision notice will be delegated essentially to the council officers. In view of the discussion about that retention basis and playground equipment and whatever, is it going to be a two-way negotiation or is it a single-way negotiation with the developer? If he was to ask for some changes to his approval, could council be within its right to negotiate the provision of some of this equipment, playground equipment, etc., for that particular development?
So thank you, Councillor. Just so I understand, if this was to be decided today, you're indicating whether a negotiated decision discussion could include that. So a negotiated decision is enacted by the applicant only. It's not something which council can compel an applicant to undertake. So it's where they choose to appeal and make representations to certain conditions which are imposed by the council. So in that instance, there may be opportunity, if they're forthcoming with that kind of discussion, to vary the requirements of certain conditions. However, we can't compel the applicant to actually make a request for a negotiated decision.
Yeah, look, I understand. So what you're saying is we can't initiate it, but if it is initiated, we can then negotiate.
Thank you, Councillor. No, so in terms of making an appeal to the council's decision, in making representations, an applicant will identify specific conditions which they're seeking to vary. So we wouldn't be able to impose new requirements as part of this unless it relates specifically to the conditions they're seeking to vary.
So can I just also reconfirm the officer's answer before in regards to the playground? This is a retention basin. It's not something you can just plop in some playground equipment and trust that that it be user friendly. I think if I could just refer back to the response that was given to the officer before, which was that it's not an ideal site for playground or parkland really to be developed.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you, officers. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McGuinness.
In saying that, can I add, it is an open area though, that people would have walk their dog or whatever. So, yeah. And the last thing I think council wants is a small park here and a small park there. But I think it is an open area that is probably good for the residents there too. You could have both at the same time, as long as it stops raining.
Thank you. You can swim your dog. Thank you, councillors. Any further discussion? If not, I'll seek a seconder to the motion. Councillor Enright, thank you. So, councillors, we now have a motion before us. Councillor McInnes, I believe, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I will, Mayor. This has been going on for some time, and I congratulate the developers on doing this. They have been listening to the residents in the area. The fact that there's a new road in there will benefit a lot of residents in that area, and it will help the overall for a lot of the district there, really. So I'm glad it has come to council, even though it was only code accessible, to have this discussion. I think on balance it is a good thing for the residents, and it is part of the residential area, and we would and I think most residents are aware that we have great difficulty in not approving these sort of areas when it's in the residential area and it conforms to the rules that are there. So I commend the resolution to councillors.
Thank you, councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? Councillor Chalk.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, look, this is, whilst this technically complies with our planning scheme, it is quite disappointing that it's been developed on the very minimum standard that they can. It's not what our community in Burna really wants, I don't believe, long term. But yes, it does technically comply. So, we'll keep up the fight, I guess, and try to make sure that our planning for the future doesn't go any below these minimums. Otherwise, we'll have a situation where it will decrease the standard of living in Burna, which is undesirable. In relation to the provision of parkland, it would have been nice to see in this first development that there was more consideration from the developer to provide some more parkland, considering the block sizes are the very minimum. But the master plan probably indicates that in the future there will be consideration of this, and also the connectivity to town is going to be very isolated for the initial owners of these lots. There won't be any connection to town via footpaths, so it's going to be a matter of time to see what other developments take place into the future to hopefully provide this connection at some point, but it certainly doesn't help the initial owners of these lots. So I will be voting for this because it does comply, but I'm also disappointed that it has been based around the very minimum of our standard, which, as alluded to before, is probably come from the state more than council. So, thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Others seeking leave to speak additionally? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. I think given the amount of discussion that we have had, I certainly understand the challenges that are associated with the sequencing of this property, and of which we have no control. But I think it's also a test of the instrument that we use to assess development, that is the Scenic Rim Planning Scheme. And it is the rule book that we operate under, and this development application has operated under the rule book that we provide as the basis to developments. So it's very difficult to say that it doesn't comply with our arrangements or our views when in fact it does. Notwithstanding some of the challenges with linkages to Burna, which may happen in the future, or parkland, which may happen in the future. It's also worth noting that there are other lots in Burna of a similar lot, and if you look to the other end, the southern end of Hoya Road, there are also 600 and something square metre lots existing that have been there for some time. So it's not like it's entirely out of the structure of lot sizes, albeit there is a distance away from the town centre. But the planning scheme is to assess what is the desired density of our future developments in the urban footprint, and because of that I support this application, because that's really what we have indicated in the Scenic Rim Planning Scheme.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak additionally? Councillor Swamborough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, we can only work with what we've got, and maybe it's unfortunate for the Boona community in this instance, but I am comforted by the undertaking that in our growth management strategy, if there, I think as a result of this whole process and discussion, we understand the shortcomings that need to be rectified, and we do have an undertaking from our strategic planner, that we are going to review the planning scheme and try and incorporate the wishes of the community going forward. And of course, if we don't learn from our mistakes, we're bound to repeat them. And so I look forward to being able to go through that process and try and provide a better outcome for the people of Boona.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? I will take the opportunity just to... It's been interesting to hear some of the comments, because it just highlights we still need better understanding. As one of those who went through the tortuous journey to defend a larger lot size than what was the desire of the state, that we have, and that this is above that minimum lot size as an estate. It's not on the minimum. I can only say that with all of our endeavours in that approach, there were many aspects that we were directed weren't acceptable, even after multiple conversations with the state around what's in our planning scheme. So I think to characterise it as mistakes is a little beyond what's occurred. The reality is there are objectives beyond this council that form part of the state expectation. We work hard to try and continue to get a sensitivity to the character and nature of our communities in everything that happens through those dialogues, and I do look forward to that ongoing conversation. However, this is a development that also offers opportunity to another layer of people who want to be part of our community. It offers them the opportunity to participate and be part of our community in Boona, and to be part of our community in the Scenic Rim. And we are properly required to accommodate that diversity of need, not just what people in history thought was right, but also now to deal with what might be a different emerging expectation. That's a challenge for us all to grapple with. It's not one that's easy to... growth is never easy to manage. Our obligation is to step up to it, and I support this development and hope that it does proceed with its other stages to allow those other developments to take place.
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, my comments certainly weren't around the 700 square metre lot size necessarily. I think the strategic planner was talking about the issues of connectivity
we're
and
in the middle of
infrastructure.
debating. I thank you for your clarification, but we've had your say. I understand what you were talking about. It's back to, you've had your opportunity to speak, councillor. We're speaking to a motion. So you had your chance. I was also allowed to speak. So it's now back, Councillor McGuinness.
There was Mr. Mayor, there was just a misunderstanding in what you said, so that's why I was correcting it.
Sorry, Councillor, the only misunderstanding, I understood what you were talking about. My comments were generally about what happened in the planning scheme, not about block sizes. So please respect process and allow, if no one else wishes to speak to the motion, Councillor McGuinness, do you wish to close?
Yes, Mayor.
Just put your microphone on.
Said most of it before. I think they have listened to the residents and the developers have here, and while it is above the minimum and it complies with all our requirements, so and not just just over. It is quite a bit over it, if I do my maths correct there. So it's. I personally like 1,000 square metre blocks, but that's up to the developers to do, and most developers would seem to go to 700 square metres, and but I know the bigger blocks seem to sell it quicker, but that's a commercial decision each of them do, and as long as it complies with their planning scheme, that's the way it is. So I think it is a good thing for Burner, and let's hope. I think it was Councillor Chalk said before the other sections of the master plan come towards council not too far down the track.
Thank you. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We will actually adjourn there for a break. That's pulled on. Thank you for that decision. Thank you, officers, for your assistance through that discussion. We will adjourn now and return at, by my watch, at 10 to 10, please. 10 to 11, councillors, I apologise. Thank you. Okay. Welcome back, councillors, executive, and those joining us in the digital gallery. Thank you for your attentions. We turn to page 30 of today's agenda, item 10.2. GM, Customer and Regional Prosperity, ask you to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. The item today before you, item 10.2, is the Police Citizens Youth Club Queensland report. I have joining me today the Acting Manager of Community and Culture, Margie Jackson. I'm happy to present this report today to Council with providing further information on the progress today in the discussions regarding a Police Citizen Youth Club for Scenic Rim based in Beaudesert and the formation of the Youth Community Centre Beaudesert Incorporated Committee, now known as YAC. Councillors, you may recall that in January of 2021, Council resolved to provide in principle support to the board of the Police Citizen Youth Club, known as PCYC Queensland, for the establishment of a Police Citizen Youth Club here in Beaudesert, and to enable the board to work with YAC and the community understanding the viability, suitability and sustainability of establishing such a facility. There's been a range of explorations that have incurred and investigations that have incurred both by YAC and PCYC Queensland in that ensuing time since we offered that support back in January of 2021. And I think it's important to note that it's been well established now by the YAC and through the support of the Beaudesert Chamber of Commerce, who have formed that group, to the need for the support such as a facility like this would provide. And PCYC Queensland has 3 pillars that it works with: youth development, crime prevention and community engagement. And that basically underpins any of the programs that would be delivered in such a facility. And today before you, councillors, is a recommendation for your consideration on how we can further provide support to YAC and to Queensland PCYC Queensland in the next step of them securing commitment from Council for suitable land to provide what is required for a facility to be built on there. It's also important to note that I believe once that's secured, it will give YAC the impetus for them to actively and proactively pursue grant funding in order to be able to develop a facility that's outlined in the report. I'm happy to take any further questions, Mayor, but I am aware that the councillors are very supportive and across this project, so I'll leave it to their questions.
So, councillors, any points for clarification to the report that you wish to ask for at the moment? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. A question to General Manager, if I may, and she may have just touched on it, but by providing this commitment to securing suitable land to establish a PCYC for Scenic Rim in Beaudesert, what benefits or opportunities does this provide for this community-led group?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. In the report, it talks about the consideration of the type of facility that is envisaged to be developed here in Beaudesert. Excuse me. And the facility is estimated to be up to 4,000 square metres, and they've asked for consideration of centrally located land and would also have space for car parking up to, say, 200 vehicles. For the group to pursue any grants, either through both Queensland or Australian government, they will need to secure land so they have the footprint required to establish such a club. So today's resolution or recommendation before you for consideration is, I guess, the next step in the pieces of the puzzle that this group has so vigilantly been working towards. It's also important to note that the group aren't doing this on their own. You know, they've had a lot of support from businesses and other community members, and also support from Queensland Police Service. So there's definitely been an identified need, and they won't be able to proceed with any viable grant applications without having a home to place the facility.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor West.
To the GM, and I don't expect you to say where, but I just wondered, do they have some possible options of land to look at that they're keen to pursue
I
given
understand.
today's outcome?
Thank you, Councillor. I understand that they have looked at a range of different land options across Beaudesert, in and around Beaudesert, and I made the point earlier that they're really keen for something centrally located, which would allow youth that potentially don't have transport to be able to have easier access to and from the facility. At the moment, though, I guess the group's looking for the confirmation from council to this level of support, and then I would imagine they'd be hoping council will audit its land holdings or land that we control, and to assist them in identifying the most suitable location that meets probably the needs of both the council and the facility.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Enright?
Thank you, Mayor. Another question to the General Manager, if I may. What additional commitment does this recommendation represent for Council?
I guess in addition to the obvious one that I've mentioned, Councillor Enright, around the first part of that recommendation in identifying or securing suitable land, the second part of that recommendation talks about a suitable representative to participate on a project control group that YAC have indicated in discussions with myself and I believe others that they're hoping to form to steer the project forward in order to undertake that accessing grants or applying for grants and for the development of this facility. And so they're asking for council to identify somebody to work closely in that process and join members of the PCYC Queensland, the YAC Committee, Queensland Police Service, working in partnership so that there's a dedicated project control group to guide those next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Not. We move to introducing any additional comments that might be beneficial. Otherwise, we introduce the recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. Before you today for your consideration is a recommendation that 1, Council commit to working with the Youth and Community Centre Beaudesert Inc. and Police Citizens Youth Club Queensland to secure suitable council-owned or controlled land to establish a Police Citizen Youth Club for the Scenic Rim in Beaudesert to be reviewed in 5 years. And 2, that Council agree to provide a suitable representative for the project control group consisting of Police Citizen Youth Club Queensland, the Youth and Community Centre Beaudesert Inc., Queensland Police Service and Scenic Rim Regional Council to be determined by the Chief Executive Officer, subject to suitable terms of reference being acceptable to Council.
Thank you. I seek a mover. Councillor Enright. Thank you. Further questions, councillors? No. Councillor Swanborough.
Mr Mayor, what do you propose are the timelines for securing a block of land for the PCYC in Beaudesert?
I think that's a question for the officers. I think this is about the launch of the process, but do you have clarity? It may be a property question.
I'm sure it is a property question, but as I'm up to Karthik, if you wish to comment, I'll just make some introductory comments to that question. Thank you for your question, Councillor Swanborough. I would anticipate that my portfolio and relevant officers within that portfolio will work with my colleagues in the property area and asset and environmental sustainability on the identification of land and work with the ACT group to go through that process and then depending on the CEO's appointment to the project control group, we'll continue to work closely with them.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's correct. The property team has already started the work in the background to identify a suitable land, and they have been involved and attended a couple of meetings with the PCYC team.
Right.
Thank you.
Mr Mayor, my question wasn't really answered. My question is, what is a suitable time frame or a time frame that we could put on this in order to, a reasonable time frame in order to affect this decision? At the moment it seems to be open-ended.
So It is a bit open-ended, councillor, because we're not driving this process. We're going to be participants in the process. So without having the ability to ask YAC today, who would lead that, and the timeframe in which they'll form the project control group, where officers have already started working on the process, I don't really think there's a timeframe required to be put on it. There's a thorough process that needs to go through, and we will commence that as it's already commenced, but we'll continue to work with YAC on the steps that we need to do to put that in place. And there will need to be other discussions back with council about the land that's identified to ensure that it is suitable, both to council and to PCYC Queensland and YAC. And that's an iterative process.
So, Councillor Chop.
Just on that, GM, how are you planning to give that information back to us? You just said about reporting back to council. Are you planning to do a quarterly update on this project?
If we are able to progress sooner than a, say, quarterly basis as suggested, we would bring those back as soon as practical. So if in the next month there's some level of agreement on the land that we have available that would be suitable, then we would bring it back at that time. I think, as you're aware, councillors, I work on a principle of brief up, brief often, and so we will most definitely keep you in the loop. And I'm yet to understand from the CEO which is the officers that will be appointed or officer to be appointed to the project control group. So once, if that recommendation is successful today, we'll need to step through that process as well, and that will then give us the kickstart that we need to continue the conversations with PCYC Queensland and YAC.
Just a supplementary to those, would it be a reasonable clarification that should a suitable footprint not currently be within council's owned or controlled, that the process may take longer because that would require going into the commercial market?
That's correct. At the moment, the officers are undertaking a review of all the strategic land freehold, which will inform us what is available, and should there be any land available, then obviously the momentum will be gained and there will be a quicker process. But if there's no land identified, then further work will be required by the officers, and that might possibly take a bit longer than what is anticipated. We should have the review completed by end of this month, so we should have a report coming back to council soon.
Thank you for that clarification. Further clarifications, councillors? Further discussion to the item? I think I would just add a piece of discussion. Certainly, obviously there's been a couple of attempts in the past to try to get an initiative like this, and those were instigated from within council and didn't succeed because there wasn't evidence of community engagement. It's great to have that community engagement here. But I do note that the recommendation that we're going to be considering also puts a review period in there of 5 years, which very much goes to, I think, the need for this to be moving in a timely manner, and that to me is something that is an important clarification, that it's good to have the good intentions. This removes a roadblock, and even before land is identified, the fact that this commitment's in place allows the Police Citizens Youth Club to have the confidence to move forward and accelerate their processes because that commitment's in place. So I think this is a good step and allows for us still to go through proper process to secure the right location, but it also allows them to put some momentum into their processes with certainty. Any other discussion?
A comment, if I may, Mayor. This is very much about building community infrastructure for the future. and I was having a look at the Queensland Government Statistician's Office website on Sunday night, which you wish you do, don't you? And it was about the and the projected population by area is really interesting, and the statistical area level 2, the SA2 for Beaudesert and Boona and Tamborine Mountain Canungra is very interesting. But Beaudesert is anticipated to increase in double the current population, so another 16 to 17 odd thousand on top of the current 16 odd thousand for the Beaudesert SA2. Beaudesert is forecast to grow at a rate 3 times greater than Boona, and a massive 7 times greater than the area of Tamborine Canungra. So it's important that we as a council consider the projected population growths in the area and allocate resources to these areas. And I think I see this as being a one step in that direction.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion, councillors? Councillor Swanberg?
Yeah, just would like clarification from the Acting General Manager in relation to the Strategic Land Review. You mentioned that it's likely to be finished in a month's time, and that will be brought back to Council?
Yes, that's correct. So once we have the draft report, we'll bring it to council.
Okay.
Any further discussion pertaining to the item before us? Not. Seek a seconder. Councillor West. Wish to speak to the motion.
Mr Mayor, I would like to move an amendment to the motion.
Let's hear it, Councillor.
Point number 3. That consideration of council-owned or controlled land which is available be referred to council, and at that time council consider the options available for land suitable for the PCYC.
I think I understand your amendment, Councillor, but I'm not quite sure because it's a double reference of part 1 of this recommendation.
To commit on land, we'll be working with them to identify it and present it back to council.
So I understand that
Maybe I could word it, when council considers the report on council-owned and controlled land, which has been under review, comma, the availability of land for the PCYC be considered.
So can I, just before we consider with your amendment, I just need a clarification perhaps from the acting GM and maybe other officers. I believe there may be some confusion of language. There is an overarching review of land across the region, which is a separate process from this specific focus towards considering Beaudesert-based land, which is a different time frame. And I don't want that language leaves that open for confusion between the whole of region review as opposed to the very narrowly focused review in the context of what is suitable or possibly suitable within the Beaudesert footprint. Councillor, your amendment could be confused as referring to the longer term, the overarching review, which is whole of region, which isn't relevant to what this is today.
And if I could just clarify, Mayor, I've had lengthy discussions with the General Manager of Asset and Sustainability, and our intention is to pursue the review of suitable land specifically for the purposes associated with this report, and that it wouldn't necessarily hinge on the final overarching strategic land review.
That might be the case, but my resolution is saying something different. It is saying that we've been doing a strategic land review now for nearly 2 years of all the council-owned and controlled land, which could be used more appropriately or sold or retained for strategic purposes or whatever. So the basis of this resolution is to say at that juncture, when we do that, we'll be better informed as to what may be immediately available or not for consideration of the use by a PCYC. That's what this purports to do.
So may I ask a question, Mayor?
No, well, first off, I'll hear from Councillor McGuinness.
Yes, I just wonder if Councillor Swanborough would maybe put the words in Beaudesert after control land, so it narrows we don't have to look at what's at Harrisville or somewhere else.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm happy to do that.
So could I just ask a question, Mayor? Because I just want some clarity as the officers who need to interpret this and action it. So what I'm hearing is that we would, as officers, need to hold up the process for the identification of the PCYC land until that other report is finished, because my understanding was, even from the previous question about timing, is that we would work with YAC in a timely manner to try and identify land in Beaudesert, to bring that back to council at a future point in time, and then that would ensure that the project could proceed.
I think the wording there now brings better clarity that it's not the whole of region review. Is what I think Councillor McGuinness and Councillor Swanborough has accepted in his proposed amendment. So Councillor Swanborough's moved this proposed amendment. Any further clarifications for a seconder?
Could I just
to this amendment?
ask for clarification from Councillor Swanborough? In assessing land that is either owned or controlled by council, if it was determined that there was no suitable land available, then does your amendment exclude looking beyond that, or really is that what you interpret?
No, I understand from what the Mayor said, that it could be a two-stage process. One is we look at internally what we've got. If we fail to find something, then the next step might be a longer step, which might mean we go into the commercial market and look. But I'm saying, we have an officer who's saying that 2-year process is coming to a conclusion in a month's time. So anyway, I won't purport to speak in favour of a thing at this point in time, but yeah, that's an answer to my question.
So the amendment as it's proposed, just for, I'm not sure whether Councillor McConnell can see, but the amendment as it now reads is to include an additional point 3 when council considers the report on council-owned or controlled land in Beaudesert, which has been under review, the availability of land for Police Citizens Youth Club be considered. That's... I think we've already identified suitable land in the part 1. Let's not re-finesse the head of the pin twice.
Just as long as it doesn't restrict the process being out of that the overall strategic land review and the timelines. I think I'm comfortable with that statement.
So can I just clarify the comment from the acting GM, just to ensure we're in. When you were referring to the review of land before and the timing of that being completed, were you referring to the overarching strategic review, or were you referring to the conversation you were having with Yak and in the Bow Desert?
No, the overall strategic review.
And so this piece of information here will be available from within that to focus to this specific item without being distracted by the overarching report.
That's correct. Thank you.
What we're hoping for. Yeah.
Okay. Any further questions? Seek a seconder to the amendment. Councillor McInnes. Wish to speak to your amendment, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this process has been going on for a long time. I know that the PCYC are keen to have an undertaking or to be able to identify suitable land, because everything depends, all their funding applications depend on being able to demonstrate that they have land available for a facility, and I believe that they've been somewhat disappointed that it's taken so long to get to this stage, especially when they see places like Pimpama close by receiving massive amounts of funding to build their PCYC, when they've been trying to get one in Bow Desert for a number of years and don't seem to be able to get over the line. If there is land available in Bow Desert which is suitable to them, we'll have done the analysis, we know what's available right across the whole region, then it's easy enough for council then to say yes, it's suitable, or no, it's not suitable for a PCYC in consultation with them. So I think this is a relevant and reasonable amendment to try and speed up the process. Otherwise, it leaves it too open. It's too open-ended. 5 years would be way too long to wait for a PCYC in Bow Desert.
Anyone wishing to speak against? I will just speak against the amendment on the basis that I think it's not understanding the 5 years referenced in Part 1 has nothing to do with completing the process. 5 years is about getting this commitment put in place, identifying the land, but expecting that PCYC will have acted within 5 years, because we're concerned about having another piece of land that we're committed to that goes nowhere. So I think this amendment is superfluous. It doesn't bother me either way, in that it doesn't create, in my view, any additional value to the original commitment and undertaking. And all I would say, comments referring to Pimpama, I'm hoping we're able to expedite this ahead of the 10-year program that they took, and that PCYC responds and accelerates into this. They've been very keen and very vocal and strong in suggesting that there's a need. We're dealing with our piece of commitment here financially, and this then makes it available for those parties to get on with their jobs. So we're trying hard to accelerate this. So I think the amendment, for me, doesn't add a lot of value to what was already proposed. Anyone else wishing to speak? Support of the amendment? Oh, Councillor, sorry. Anyone else wishing to seek leave? Councillor McInnes?
Yes, Mayor. I think this actually does, contrary to what you've just said there, I think it gives a commitment from council to get this moving sooner rather than later. There's been some frustration on all parties, no doubt, and I think this is a good show of faith that we want to move forward with this and have it nailed down, so to speak, and move forward as quickly as possible with it. So,
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? Wish to close, councillor?
No, I think everything that needs to be said has been said. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Those in favour of the amendment? That's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. It's important to hear both sides of the argument. As I say, let's move back to the motion now. The mover, will you accept this to your motion?
Yes, certainly, Mayor.
Thank you. We return to the original motion then, including the new Part 3. And just wait till we... Now, return to just to speak to your motion, Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I think this is a very important step in the progress of providing community infrastructure for our town and our region. As I mentioned earlier, but it is forecast to grow at a rate 3 times that of Boona and a massive 7 times the rate of Tamborine, Mountain and Canungra area. It's important that we do assist where we can community groups to provide this very important infrastructure. And I would like to extend my gratitude to the many volunteers who have supported this concept since its inception, which is almost 2 years ago. And I would like to recognise John Powell, who is the president of YAC, to David Kasolki, who is the president of the Badesset Chamber of Commerce, from where this subcommittee was commenced, and all of the YAC members, a great group of people made up of very community-minded volunteers, and I see that this is one important step to provide a suitable land that is central in Badesset, to provide them the opportunity to explore all funding options to make this happen for the future.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I also would like to acknowledge the Badesset Chamber of Commerce, who initiated this venture, and all the members of YAC, who over the last year have worked absolutely tirelessly on this project. They are very committed, very dedicated to the youth, especially of the Badesset area, but also for the whole region. So we'll look forward to this project coming to fruition in a timely manner.
Thank you. Anyone else seeking leave to speak additionally? If not, you wish to close, councillor? Put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.3 on page 34 of your agenda, and we turn to the acting GM, Asset and Environmental Sustainability. Introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, councillors and members in the digital gallery. Item 10.3 is the free trade policy and procedure, which has been reviewed as part of the 2021 Policy and Procedure Review project overseen by the governance team. A review of this policy and the supporting guideline has been undertaken and is presented to you for consideration. The earlier version was reviewed and adopted in 2018, and this is the new version for your consideration. And I've got Manager Maintenance and Operations, Scott Osman, who will be giving you a brief overview of the report and also taking any questions in relation to this policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions? We've all had a chance to read the reviews. Any additional? Just looking now. Councillor McConnell's okay. Any additional comments to add value to this report? If not, asked that we introduce the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The recommendation is that Council adopt the attached free tree property owners policy, which will replace the previous version adopted on 22nd October 2018. Number 2, Council rescind the free tree property owners council guideline as adopted on 22nd October 2018, and Council note the supporting free tree property owners procedure, which will be forwarded to the Chief Executive Officer for approval to operationally support the Council policy and replace the guideline recommended for rescission.
Thank you. For that introduction, I seek a mover. Councillor West. Any additional questions, councillors? I can't see Councillor McConnell again. Any additional discussion? If not, I seek a seconder. Councillor Enright, wish to speak. Motion, Councillor West.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, not too many changes in the policy, and the guidelines look good that we're updating it in a timely manner. I just want to mention this is an option or program that really our community really do value, actually, and it's a very small contribution that we can make to them. And certainly the free tree days are a perfect opportunity for council to also talk to the community about other things that are happening in the community, and it's a perfect opportunity for disaster management and those sorts of environmental type programs to be incorporated. So I commend this motion.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally? Put the motion. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to page 48 of the agenda, item 10.4. Acting GM, I'll ask you to introduce once more.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4 is again a revised policy on the street lighting / public lighting other than new development policy and procedure. This is again part of the 2021 policy and procedure review project overseen by the governance team. The review has been completed and now the new policy is presented to you for consideration. Manager Maintenance and Operation, Mr Scott Osman, to take on any questions or provide a further overview on the policy if required. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions for clarification to this report? Okay. So, Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, just a quick one to the council officers. If they could just update us on new designs / equipment, talking about solar power, solar batteries, up to public light. Obviously, if we're going to use full lighting, that grid and there's a cost operationally to count. So is there a new standard coming out for LED solar power lights?
Thank you, Councillor McConnell. In regards to the use of alternate energy sources in regards to lighting, they will be investigated on an as-needs basis depending on the application. But at present, in consultation with the GM CRP's portfolio, we are having a review of our energy use consumption and ways to improve our energy consumption as a council. So those matters will be taken into effect when we are considering, standalone street lighting if that's required and so forth. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further, Councillor Swinburne?
No, just the question on page 59 of the report in relation to the policy. the policy talks about council supplying a street lighting system for the urban areas of the Scenic region. Does Tamborine Mountain, is it classified as an urban area, and does this policy apply to Tamborine Mountain?
I would have to take the question around Tamborine Mountain being classified as an urban area on notice. Sorry, Councillor Swamber, I'm not aware of the answer to that. But in regards to the policy being for Tamborine Mountain, yes, Tamborine Mountain is included in regards to this policy, as are all other areas of the Scenic Rim.
Could I just ask a supplementary to your question, because your question really goes to what the planning zoning is, Councillor. I'm not sure whether the GM could clarify off the top of her head about those zonings, but they're quite. Is it correct that there's a wide range of zonings across Tamborine Mountain, so not all parts would trigger that definition?
That's my understanding, Mayor.
Yes, council says council will supply a street lighting system for the urban areas of the Scenic region. So this policy only applies to urban areas, but it doesn't really define adequately, in my view, what an urban area is. So there's a bit of a lack of clarity in the policy, and unless we can get that clarified.
So, Councillor Swamborough, with regards to that, this policy does cater for urban, residential, rural environments. So it does specify the standards we require in each of those areas. When we refer to an urban area in regards to supply of street lighting, in general, it's classed as our commercial kind of areas where, so the Beaudesert Town Centre, Gallery Walk, those type of areas where the Boona Main Street, those type of areas where we would supply street lighting for both business benefit and for security benefit in those locations as well. That's how we would apply this in usage. Not for a street, a residential street that would be applied for there wouldn't be street lighting associated with those locations.
Well, it's an interesting comment about Gallery Walk. I don't believe there's any street lighting along Gallery Walk at the moment. Are we proposing that if we put in this policy, we're going to put street lights along Gallery Walk?
No, that's not what I'm proposing, Councillor Swamborough. That is just an option that if we're required to, if we do an audit of that location and there is security issues, or we put, if there is any future upgrade to Gallery Walk in regards to the street, and there's crossings put in place that require them to have lighting for the safety of pedestrians, then they would be covered under this policy. I'm not saying that is going to occur, but we need to factor in, if these things do occur in due course, that we have a policy that covers those.
Mr Mayor, in light of what the manager has said, I have some concerns, because the actual policy says that the urban street lighting system is intended to provide basic assistance to the travelling public using town streets at night, and is not intended to be a security lighting system. And I find that there seems to be a conflict in the policy and the procedure, because the policy says it's not to be a security lighting system, and yet when we come down to the procedure on page 61, it might be page 62. Page 62, it says, when it comes to shielding of lights, it talks about council prefers not to install shields on street lights, as this can reduce lighting levels below that required by the Australian standards, resulting in public safety issues. So I'm not sure from these two documents what the intent of the policy and the procedure is in relation to public safety issues. Is it in or is it out?
Sorry, Councillor, there are two different words there. Can we clarify public safety issues versus security lighting, which I note on page 61, part 1B of the procedure actions, makes a specific clarification. Perhaps the officers could enlighten the definitional rationale between those two.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Swanborough. Yes, so a clear definition between the terminology you were using there. One, you were you were requesting about security lighting. The secondly was about safety. Okay, so security is in terms of it could be property security or personal security, as into someone not feeling safe in their street. Okay, from a safety perspective, we're talking about the use of a road corridor in a safe manner. Okay, so that's where I went back to previously, where if we need to put street lighting in for a road crossing or a footpath that is a safety matter, then it would be reviewed in that way. But for someone's security of their property or so forth, it wouldn't be considered to be street lighting. We wouldn't accept that. So we try to clarify the two between personal security and personal safety.
Okay. My next question is, if we're not sure about whether this applies to Tamborine Mountain or not, would it be wise to do some consultation with the community in relation to this particular issue? Because I think it leaves it too open, and this is a very, very, very sensitive issue on Tamborine Mountain. For the last 35 years that I've lived there, one of the great values that have been protected and have been raised in all the community plans that I've been involved with, and probably that this council's been involved with as well, there's always the issue of protecting the night sky, and that's one of the great things that have been achieved over the last 35 years on Tamborine Mountain. But this policy seems to indicate that that could be a threat for a number of reasons, and I was just wondering whether you could comment on what protections we may have if the community wants to retain that value. What can we do to make sure that that occurs?
Thank you, Councillor Swanborough. Yes, as a whole region, it's not just unique to Tamborine Mountain. We have that philosophy across the whole region, from one side or the other, of protecting the night sky and only limiting street lighting to as we're required. In regards to what protections we have, this policy is aimed at the requests we generally receive from the public for street lighting, and it's for those ad hoc requests. This is not for new developments. Okay, so new developments are covered through the planning applications and were covered through our land and development guidelines. Okay, so in regards to this, it would actually be a request from, most of these would be a request from the community. The odd one, as I said before, would be a public safety, if there's a crossing or something to do with road safety that might require a lighting that council would be putting forward. But in regards to these, we as a business unit and AES as the portfolio under Chris, we do not have a budget to install street lighting. So the factor for that would be that if a request come into council and we assessed it and we deemed that there was sufficient merit that there may need to be a street light in this location, we would bring that request forward to council for consideration, and council would then have to have a resolution that they would like a street light in that location, and they would have to then fund that street light as well at the same time.
Thank you for that clarification about both the scope and the control points. Councillor?
Just one more question. The policy talks about council officers being able to determine an application for under 3 street lights. So what provisions do we have that the public interest would be served if arbitrary decisions, or I'm not saying that in a detrimental way at all, but if decisions are made by council officers which may be perceived to be contrary to this particular policy for whatever reason, is that a desirable situation? I know that in the past there have been policies that all new street lighting, whether it be requested from the public or individuals or anybody, except for main roads, it would appear they're exempt. Then there would be some level of consultation. Would this be possible?
Yes, so if we do get applications for street lighting, we will consult with the adjoining property owners and anyone who is impacted by that street light before we come to any conclusion. In there, we do state that we can have a decision up to 3 street lights, but we're governed on actual capital funding associated to do that. So if and when there is any capital funding, we can make that decision up to 3 lights, but at present there's no capital funding for that, so it would still be a decision of council. But we would consult, and I think it's explained in the procedure that we do consult with adjoining property owners and impacted parties in regards to the street light before we come to council for any decision.
Just whilst Councillor Swanborough's reading, in terms of the materiality, given the structure's changed, in terms of the content of these documents, has there been any significant change in this? It's changed format and it's changed the structure, but it would, from my reading of it, it seemed to fairly replicate the content and structure that was previously in place. Is that reasonably accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was one minor update in that we brought that rural roads and rural areas were required to meet the current Australian standard. That was the only change contextually from the previous policy that was adopted in 2014.
Thank you. Councillor Swanborough.
Yes, in 2014, which I was on the council in 2014, there was a view that Tamborine Mountain wasn't an urban area. And so that's why that got passed the way it did. But now we have that in doubt. And that's what concerns me a little bit about just following this policy on. We know that the zones have changed. The regional plan's changed. Council planning scheme has changed. So, and it seems to me that we could have a much wider area impacted and defined as an urban area now in Tamborine Mountain than before, and that's what concerns me.
I don't know. I note your comment, Councillor. I don't recall any material change in the planning scheme on that regard, and we don't have that capacity to consider. I think the officers have answered to the best of their knowledge. I didn't hear any. I can hear your doubt, but it's good to know that that definition was deemed acceptable previously as separating that. If we're able to, just pause for a moment.
Mayor, could I just clarify the last point from Councillor Swanborough? From my understanding, Councillor Waistall was the representative in 2014.
That's correct, and I believe that was his viewpoint expressed at the time.
So that's a little different to what you previously articulated, I thought.
What I can provide, Mayor, is the Manager of Planning, although unwell, is listening online and has just said urban area designations have not changed on Tamborine Mountain.
So that provides the clarity. Nothing has changed.
From a planning point of view.
From a planning point of view, which is, I guess, the definition. So I don't know that we can get much more benefit out of having officers come in. That's the clarity on the definition. That it hasn't changed from that time.
So is rural residential land urban or residential?
Sorry, what was it? I missed that, Councillor.
Acreage properties on Tamborine Mountain are generally in either rural res or low density residential. Are they urban areas or not?
No, not under our classification.
No. Otherwise, some of the areas down around Tamborine Village would be in the same. Yeah, so we just need to recognise the definitions exist across the region, not just on Tamborine Mountain, and therefore we have all those range of rural residential, and we don't get requests for, very, as far as I'm aware, we don't get many requests for lighting in those places, and I don't see much lighting being considered or installed as a result.
No, you're correct there, Mr Mayor. In my time here, we've had very few requests for additional street lighting. Yep.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, then we come back to the recommendation to introduce, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation is that Council adopt the attached street lighting, public lighting other than new development policy, which will replace the previous version adopted on 22nd October 2014. And Council note the supporting street lighting / public lighting other than new development procedure, which will be forwarded to the Chief Executive Officer for approval to operationally support the Council policy.
Seek a mover. Councillor West, thank you. Any additional questions, councillors? Councillor Schwambury, have a question?
No, Mr Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment to the resolution.
Well, let's work through the questions first to get clarity, and then we can come back to your amendment if we can. Thanks. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor, let's hear your proposed amendment.
My proposed amendment is in relation to street lighting on Tamborine Mountain. It be recognised that it is primarily not an urban area. And the community values reflected in the community plans indicate they do not wish to have street lighting generally except as provided for other reasons. And two, that street lighting proposals for Tamborine Mountain be the subject of consultation with not only residents but the wider community. Yeah, that'll be 3 and 4. Yeah.
So Councillor, given that in this chamber we act for the whole of the region, or we're supposed to, and that the office has clarified before that we have that protect the night sky as an intent across the whole region. Before you proceed with your amendment, perhaps an easier way forward is that because there are so few, that all requests for additional street lighting outside of new developments are the subject of oversight by council, which would include whatever then is required of consultation or otherwise.
If you can see that that's written somewhere else in the plan.
Councillor, I'm suggesting that rather than creating something that is divisive and singles out one part of the region, I'm just saying that as a policy it should be something that encompasses the whole of region.
Point of order, Mr Mayor.
So,
Point of order.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr Mayor, it should be recognised, that this is not a divisive recommendation. This is a recommendation that recognises the different needs and wants of the various townships and regions of the Shire. And I don't believe that a statement that this is divisive because it recognises the general needs of the largest community and on Tamborine in the Scenic Rim Council. This is not divisive. It's merely reflective of the views of the community and the values that they have, which may not be shared by other communities. And we and I recognise the different values in all the communities around the region, and I think our community plan also acknowledges the diversity that we have between our towns and villages, and it's not always possible to have a one-size-fits-all policy for the whole region.
Councillor, I was merely pointing out that we could end up with a whole series of amendments from each community that identifies each community, and that because we could have the same requests and commitments at Rathdowney, Canungra, Tamborine, Elysium Village, and the better way, given that this is an intent that we have at the policy level, perhaps that we clarify in the policy level the desire to to protect the night sky as a priority for considering any development requests such as this, and that we have a process that recognises how that plays out for each community. So all I'm saying is far better to have something that identifies this so it is applicable to all of our communities, because it is a concern for all. It's not just a concern for one. And that would be, otherwise we run the risk that everyone will want to run an amendment that replicates the wording for their community, and therefore we end up with 20 pages of a specific for each community.
Mr Mayor, that's probably a hypothetical situation. I haven't heard anybody jump out of their seats and stick up for any of their communities in relation to this policy. It seems that there are some unanswered issues here in this policy, and I just wondered whether we should defer this and have further discussions on it and bring it back to a future meeting.
I would be happy if you withdraw your proposed amendment for consideration, and we're proposing to move a procedural motion to let this be held over to a future meeting, Councillor, which allows consideration of how to accommodate the clarity in process.
I would be happy if that was the general view around the table. All right, happy to withdraw the amendment, Mr Mayor, and resolve and move a procedural motion that the matter be deferred to a future meeting of the Council.
So, Councillor West I would ask you, would you be prepared to withdraw your moving of the original motion?
Yes, I would, so long as this report comes back to us for further discussion at a later time. Happy to support.
Thank you. Sorry, is there a concern, Acting GM?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm with the decision of, deferring this policy, but I don't see how this is going to further make any overall or larger changes. What is expected and what's been discussed at this around this table today, and I'm not quite sure because the policy itself is just a guiding tool, and if you're going to go from a town-wise feedback and consultation, I think it then goes beyond and larger than a policy.
So I note your comment. Our discussion today is particularly focused to the policy and its supporting document procedure for operationalising. The concerns expressed at the table are around some definitional clarity to include so that there's no confusion. The concerns expressed today around, that I've heard, there might be others, the strong clarification of our policy intent about protect the night sky, which is right across the region, and the clarity of being able to deal with any specific community matters of interest to ensure that they're clarified in the, particularly probably in the procedure, to be adequately providing for the consideration of those. Councillor Swan was called out the particular example of Tamborine Mountain, but we have many communities that express similar passions and concerns and desire for that thought process for such applications. CEO, are you comfortable with that as an opportunity for further review of the policy procedure?
Yeah, I think that's clear. Thank you, Mayor. I think the other consideration that I heard was that where officers had an ability to approve less than 3, that perhaps that be adjusted so that all applications would come through to council. Perhaps that would provide that overarching point of control. I do understand, though, that these matters are capital investments by council, so would need another approval process in any respect, but I think that probably removes that point of doubt.
So does that cover the scope of the...
I agree with all of that, Mr. Mayor, and the other last point is just we need a better clarification of what is urban land so that we understand where the policy applies or not.
Sorry, Councillor, that was my opening comment. Better definitional clarity of that. You may not have heard. Okay, so does that provide sufficient guidance, and certainly we'll be able to provide more clarity along the way?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a procedural motion in front of us, councillors. We don't need a seconder. Moved by Councillor Swanborough. Those in favour? I think that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, that brings us to the end of today's agenda. At 11:58, I bid the gallery good day. And thank you, councillors and officers, for your participation in the meeting, and we will close the meeting.
I have taken press releases, Mayor.
Thank you.